A young soldier stumbles into a crowded press room in Washington, D.C., his uniform still dusty from the battlefield, his face quiet, haunted, but as the reporters shout questions, one finally rises above the rest. How did you survive when everyone else thought it was impossible? His eyes scan the room, then he says something that makes everyone stop breathing for a second because of Rambo. Some laugh. Others whisper. Cameras zoom in. But what happens next not only silences the entire room, it reveals a truth so powerful it will change how you see courage forever. Before we begin this incredible story, let us know in the comments who was the fictional character that shaped your childhood. And if you love stories like this one, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow at 6 p.m. we'll be back with another tale that will stay with you long after it ends. He was just a kid with a dirty VHS tape, rewinding the same scene over and over again, memorizing every breath, every move, every line that came out of Rambo's mouth like it was gospel. Years later, that same kid would crawl through blood-soaked sand under a foreign sun, saving lives with skills no one had taught him officially, only imagined. And when the world asked him how, he'd say something no one expected, because of Rambo. Jay Dalton wasn't born a soldier, he was carved into one. The humid Kentucky air always hung heavy in his childhood home, a collapsing wooden house where mold was stronger than family. His father had vanished before Jay turned 9. His mother, too tired from double shifts and triple disappointments, barely noticed when Jay spent entire nights in the basement with his grandfather's old television and a stack of worn-out tapes rescued from a pawn shop. One of them had First Blood scribbled in black marker across a faded label. Jay watched it until the screen blurred. It wasn't just a movie, it was a manual, a doctrine. The rain-soaked forests, the traps, the silence, the pain, it all spoke louder than the chaos in his real world. Rambo didn't just survive, he endured, and that was something. By 15, Jay had built his own makeshift bunker in the woods behind the school, filled with traps made from trash and sharpened sticks. People laughed, teachers called his mother, kids threw rocks. But Jay smiled through it, quietly tying knots, watching them, memorizing their habits like prey. But he never struck back. But then came the day his mother collapsed from a stroke. Therefore, he left home at 17 and enlisted the moment he could. The Army didn't ask about movies. They wanted grit, endurance, loyalty. Jay gave all three. And when it hurt, when it burned, when others dropped, he remembered the cold stare of a man with a bandana and a haunted past. He became the kind of soldier they didn't advertise. Not loud, not shiny, just surgical, efficient, unshakable. Afghanistan, 2023. Somewhere along the eastern ridge, just west of the Pakistani border, Jay's unit, Shadow Team 9, was tasked with what they called a ghost whisper. Infiltrate a known insurgent zone under cover of darkness, extract a missing translator who'd vanished 2 weeks prior, and get out unseen. Jay didn't blink. It was just another Tuesday. The chopper sliced through the dusk like a blade. Dust and static filled his helmet as the captain barked coordinates. Below, the world waited, brown, broken, brutal. They hit ground at 0200 hours, and at 06, everything went to hell. An IED ripped through the lead Pathfinder, one man down. Then came the echo of rifle fire, chaotic, uncoordinated, but relentless. They were surrounded. Radio contact failed. Night vision blinked out. The captain was shot through the throat before he gave a second command. Men screamed. Jay didn't, but his instincts kicked in, not the ones from manuals, but from movies. Therefore, he dragged 3 men into the shadows, silenced one of their own who couldn't stop crying, and mapped a plan using sticks in the dirt. The mission was... The war had changed. Now, it was about survival. Jay led them through goat trails, ancient irrigation paths, and dry ravines. He moved like mist. He spoke in gestures. He built decoys using torn uniforms. He even sharpened bamboo he found near an abandoned field and set a perimeter of traps that echoed a familiar design from long ago. Corporal Diaz, bleeding from his leg, stared at one of them and muttered, Is this some Rambo shit?" Jay didn't answer. He just kept working. On day 2, Sergeant Miller, who once mocked Jay for being that VHS weirdo, stumbled into a pit trap set for ambush defense. Jay caught him mid-fall. "Guess I'm glad you watched those movies," Miller. Jay said nothing, just tightened the bandage around his ribs. But things were getting worse. The insurgents were tracking them, and the injured were slowing them down. Rations were gone. The only water left came from puddles of goat piss. The escape route wasn't just closing, it was vanishing. And then, just as Jay thought they might have slipped the net, he saw something up ahead, something that didn't belong. A thin metal wire stretched low across the dirt path. Tripwire. He stopped instantly, lifted one finger. A click, a scream, and then darkness. Pain didn't feel like pain anymore. It felt like rhythm, like memory. Jay opened his eyes to the sound of his own breath, ragged, uneven, scraping against cracks. The blast had thrown him into a dry ditch, half covered in dust and silence. His ears rang, but not like before. This time it sounded like glass wind chimes underwater. He moved slowly. Every bone argued with him, but he moved. The tripwire had set off a makeshift mine. Not shrapnel, not fire, but concussive force, a scare tactic. Still, it was enough to scatter the group and break their fragile momentum. His first thought wasn't about himself, it was Diaz. Jay crawled, then limped toward the path. He found Diaz first, alive, face down, sobbing, with one arm twisted under him and a shallow gash bleeding above his eyebrow. Jay flipped him over gently. Diaz looked up. Did it hit us?" he whispered. "No," Jay said. "It warned us." A few meters ahead, Sergeant Miller was trying to sit up. His arm was bleeding through the sleeve, but he was conscious. He met Jay's eyes and just nodded. That was enough. But one was missing. Therefore, Jay ran. Private Samuels, the youngest, the one who always ate last and never complained. Jay found him lying next to a jagged rock. His leg twisted unnaturally. His eyes fluttered. His hands were shaking. Jay knelt beside him. "Talk to me." Samuels gasped. "Can't feel my foot." The leg was broken. Clean, not fatal. But they couldn't carry him and keep moving at speed. "You ever see Rambo the Third?" Jay asked with a strange calm. Samuels blinked. "What?" "The horse jump, the explosion, the rescue." Jay smiled faintly. He improvised. "You're joking?" "No." Jay took off his belt. "But I am about to carry you like he carried Colonel Trotman, so hold tight." Samuels laughed, then screamed. They made camp that night under the skeleton of a stone bridge. Jay kept watch. His rifle lay across his knees and his eyes stayed fixed on the trees, black shapes against an even blacker sky. Miller approached in silence. "Why do you keep doing that?" he asked, sitting beside Jay. "Doing what?" "Saving everyone like it's your damn job." Jay didn't answer. Miller took off his helmet, rubbed his temple, and stared at the stars. "I used to think you were broken," he said. "You never talked, you never bonded. You never asked dumb questions or wasted time. That kind of soldier scares the brass." Jay looked over. "And now?" "Now?" Miller shrugged. "Now I think maybe you're just a different breed." Jay exhaled slowly. "Not different, just focused." "On what?" "On keeping people alive, that's all." "Even if it kills you?" Jay nodded. Miller sighed. "You ever going to tell us where you learned all this?" Jay looked back at the forest, and after a long moment he said, "From a man who never existed." The days blurred. Their only map was memory. Their food came from roots, bugs, and sheer willpower. Jay used fragments of mirrors to redirect light signals across the valley. He taught Diaz how to listen to bird patterns for signs of movement. He even crafted a crude prosthetic splint for Samuel's using rifle parts and strips of undershirt. But something was changing. The men were growing silent, not from fear, but from reverence. They began to look at Jay not as a peer, but as something else entirely. A myth in motion. Jay hated it. But on the fourth night, when a drone buzzed overhead and they had to bury themselves in freezing mud to avoid detection, Samuels whispered, "Hey, Jay." "What? Was Rambo real to you?" Jay paused. Yes." "Yeah, still is?" "Yes." "Do you think we'll make it out?" Jay looked up at the stars and said, "I don't think. I plan for it." That night, Jay finally dreamed, but it wasn't about war. It was about his childhood basement. He was 12 again, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor, watching First Blood. But this time, he wasn't alone. The room was filled with soldiers, real ones, all injured, all watching, silent, listening, bleeding. And standing in the back corner, arms crossed, was Rambo. No words, just a nod. Jay woke up cold, and suddenly it hit him. They were being herded. Every escape path that looked open had been a trap. Someone was predicting his moves. Someone who knew about military patterns. Someone who understood him. That's when he remembered Ghost. A sniper they'd briefly teamed with 2 months ago. Cold eyes, no sense of humor, always watching, always listening. Jay had hated him on sight. He'd vanished after one mission. But what if he hadn't? Jay stood. He scanned the horizon, the wind shifted, and there, on a ridge across the ravine, was a glint of something, a reflection, just for a second. It vanished, but it was enough. He turned to Miller. "We're not running from ghosts," he said. "We're being hunted by one." Jay stared at the ridge long after the glint had disappeared. Some men see shapes in clouds. He saw traps in terrain. There was no doubt anymore. The ambush hadn't been luck. The pressure was surgical, predictable. Every move he'd made, every route, every tactic, even the psychological games, had been anticipated, because whoever was hunting them didn't just understand war. He understood him. The decision came at dawn. Jay called the others together beneath a canopy of brush. His voice was low, stripped of hesitation. "We're not heading to the evac site," he said. Miller blinked. "What?" Jay knelt, drew a rough map in the dirt. "We're being funneled. Every trail we've taken, every choice. It's too clean. Too expected. The evac is the final trap. If we go, we die." Diaz looked terrified. "Then, what the hell do we do?" Jay pointed to the mountain pass. "We go through Ash Valley." Samuels coughed. "That's suicide." Jay stared him down. "It's also the only move they won't expect. No sane person goes through that canyon without air cover," Miller scoffed. "Which we don't have." Jay's voice turned to iron. "We don't need air cover. We need conviction." There was silence. Then Miller nodded. "If I'm going to die," he said, "I'd rather follow a lunatic with a plan than a coward with a radio." Ash Valley wasn't a name. It was a warning. Once a copper mine, it had collapsed decades ago, leaving behind jagged rocks, black water, and a network of toxic fumes that never quite settled. Even the locals avoided it. GPS barely registered inside. It was a dead zone, a graveyard, which made it perfect. Jay led the way. Each step was deliberate. He moved like a ghost in boots, eyes always scanning, ears tuned for the smallest sound. His fingers brushed every surface they passed, not out of superstition, but memory. He was searching for vibration, for echo, for change. They went 2 days without seeing another soul. But then they heard the whistle, one long tone, pause, two. Jay froze. It wasn't wind, it was communication. Old school, precise. He looked at Miller. "They're here." And just as he said it, a bullet ripped past his shoulder, burying itself in the rock with a sharp pop. They ran. The mountain turned against them, stone sliding, air tightening. Samuel screamed as his prosthetic splint broke, and Jay caught him mid-fall, throwing the young soldier over his shoulders again without slowing. Gunfire echoed. Voices in Pashto shouted through the gorge. Jay ducked into a cavern barely wide enough for two bodies and waited. His mind raced. This wasn't a normal strike. It was an extraction mission. They were trying to take someone. Why? And then he remembered something Ghost had said months ago during, "Some minds are too dangerous to kill. You study them first." Jay realized this wasn't just about ending him. It was about watching him, learning from him, weaponizing him. The cavern led to an opening, a natural sinkhole bathed in blue twilight. The others followed, breathless, wounded, exhausted. Jay turned, counted heads, all there, for now. He found a ledge and sat, then spoke. "They're not trying to kill us, they're studying us, me." Miller wiped his brow. "Why?" "Because they think I'm Rambo." No one laughed, not even. Jay leaned back. "Every move we've made, every pattern, every trick, they're all pulled from the movies. They know that. They're trying to learn what I know, how far I'll go. If I break..." "You're serious, Jay. They're trying to replicate me." Later that night, Jay found a hollow in the rock where the wind made noise. He knelt and pulled a pocket knife from his boot, the same knife he'd carried since baiting. He carved a small mark into the wall, a symbol, a reminder. Because deep down, he knew something no one else did. He wouldn't be leaving Ash Valley. By morning, Samuels could no longer walk. Jay didn't ask permission. He built a stretcher from branches and strapped the boy to it. "We're 4 clicks from the border," he said. "The last hill is steep, but once we're over it, they can't follow." Miller asked the question none of them dared say out loud. "What if they're already waiting on the other side?" Jay looked him dead in the eye. "Then we take them with us." The ascent began. Each step was agony. The mountain punished them with heat, gravel, and shifting wind. Jay's back screamed under Samuel's weight. But he never paused. Miller took point. Diaz covered the rear, and then, halfway up the final ridge, they found it. A single figure, standing still, sniper rifle slung across his back. "Ghost!" Jay froze. Ghost raised his hand, not to wave, but to point, at Jay. No words, no threats, just acknowledgement. Then he vanished into the mist. Jay knew what it meant. This was personal now. They reached the top and saw the valley below. Helicopters, American ones. Jay raised a flare. The red smoke curled upward like a scream, and within minutes the rotors came. The team was saved. Except for one thing. Jay didn't get on the bird. Miller screamed at him. Diaz cursed. Samuels cried. Jay handed Miller a note. "Give this to my nephew," he said. "He's the one who lent me the VHS." But Jay was already walking back down the ridge, back toward the cave, back toward Ghost, because some things you don't run from, some things you finish. He descended alone. The sun was bleeding over the horizon, spilling orange light onto the rocks below. Jay Dalton walked with purpose, hands steady, boots silent, heart calm. He had nothing left to prove, only something left to end. He wasn't running toward Ghost. He was returning to the place where this version of him began, because before he was a soldier, he was a kid in a basement. And this was the closing. Jay entered the cavern without. It smelled like ash and no music, just Ghost, waiting. He was seated on a jagged rock, rifle resting beside him, arms crossed. Jay stood opposite him, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Ghost tilted his head. "You came alone." Jay nodded. Ghost almost smiled. "You always had to be the story, didn't you?" Jay didn't answer. Instead, he dropped his gear, unarmed. Ghost stood slowly. "I studied you, you know, your files, your missions, your scars." Jay's voice was low. "I'm not special." "Oh, but you are." Ghost stepped closer. "You turned trauma into scripture. You turned pain into choreography. and you followed a man who never existed, as if he were God. Jay's hands curled into fists. He gave me something no one else did. Purpose. Hope. Ghost walked in a slow circle. You taught your men how to survive, but do you know what else you taught them? Jay stayed still. You taught them to mythologize you, to follow stories, to believe that heroes are real. They are, Jay whispered. No, Ghost said coldly. They're useful. There was silence. Then Jay asked, What's your real name? Ghost blinked. What? Jay stepped forward. You hide behind shadows, behind ideas. You know who I am, but I think you're still running from who you were. Ghost's jaw clenched. You want to know who I was? Jay nodded. Ghost leaned in. I was the boy who watched First Blood and never became you. The room shifted. Jay felt the breath leave his chest. Everything made sense. Ghost wasn't hunting Jay. He was hunting what he could have been. The fight was inevitable. Not out of anger, but necessity. It wasn't cinematic. No music, no slow motion. Just two men trained by pain, built by silence, colliding in a storm of fists, elbows, knees. One shaped by a myth, the other by its failure. Jay bled from the mouth. Ghost bled from the eyes. It ended with both on the ground, heaving, shaking, broken. Jay looked up at the ceiling. A single ray of light pierced through a crack in the rock, and in that light, floating in the dust, he saw a red bandana. Not real, but it didn't matter. Jay smiled. Ghost wheezed. Why are you smiling? Jay closed his eyes. Because you forgot the last scene. They pulled him from the cave hours later. The drone footage had picked up movement, and when Delta operators stormed the valley, they found two bodies, one alive, one dead. Jay Dalton's heart was still beating, barely. 3 months later, Walter Reed Medical Center, Washington, D.C. Jay sat in a wheelchair, sunlight pouring in through the window. A cane leaned against the frame. His face was healed mostly. The scars remained, some visible, some not. He was holding a remote. The TV played First Blood for the first time. He wasn't watching it to learn. He was watching it to say goodbye. A knock on the door. A teenage boy stepped in, nervous. Jay smiled. You must be Ethan. The boy nodded. You wrote me a letter. I did. Ethan walked closer. You said you saved lives because of a movie. Jay looked him in the eyes. I did. That's crazy. Jay laughed softly. Yeah, but sometimes the only way out of the dark is to believe in a flashlight someone else imagined. Ethan sat beside him. They watched in silence. Then the boy asked, Do you miss it, being in the fight? Jay looked out the window and said, No, I miss believing I had to fight to be worthy. The media had tried to make a spectacle of it, the soldier who credited a fictional hero for real-world bravery. Jay refused interviews, until one night he agreed to a high school assembly. He stood before 600 teenagers, all buzzing with anticipation. He held up the old VHS tape. This, he said, saved me when no one else could. There was laughter. Jay didn't flinch. Not because it taught me violence, not because it made me strong, but because it made me feel seen. The auditorium went quiet. Sometimes stories are the only parents some kids have, the only teachers, the only mentors. Don't underestimate what one story or one person can do. Outside, after the assembly, a girl approached him, tiny, frail, wearing a hoodie with sleeves that covered her hands. She looked up. My dad left. My mom drinks. I sleep in my car. Jay knelt. She held out a crumpled photo. It was of Rambo. He's the only reason I haven't given up yet. Jay's throat closed. He took the photo, kissed it, and handed it back. Then hold on to him until you don't need him anymore. Jay walked away from the crowd. Alone, but not lonely. The world would forget the details, the names, the mission. But someone, somewhere, would remember the soldier who survived because of a story. And maybe, just maybe, They'd survive too. He was just a kid with a dirty VHS tape, but something in his eyes told you he believed. You didn't have to be here, but you stayed. That means more than you know. Thank you for listening to my story. Not everyone does. Take care of yourself, and the ones who can't fight back, I'll see you when it matters.